Behrens, and this is the second of 3 videos on the book of Ruth, recorded at Restoration Messianic Fellowship. This will be chapter 3. Enjoy the study. To recap where we are, we're in the book of Ruth, and last time we finished chapter 2, and by way of lead up, the question is, what do you do if you don't have an heir to the family? We talked about 2 cases. One was Lot and his daughters, and the other one was Judah and Tamar. What we said is that both of those stories represent an attempt at levirate marriage, or in the Hebrew, yibum, which was not quite right. So with Lot and his daughters, the object there is to preserve Lot's line, which was successful, but the way they did it via incest was not a good thing. Similarly, the attempt to preserve Judah's line through Tamar was also successful, but the way it was done is later going to be forbidden in Torah, which is a father-in-law with his daughter-in-law. That is specifically forbidden in Leviticus. Now, we'll go through that later. Ruth is a case of levirate marriage, or yibum, done correctly, where now you have Elimelech of Judah, who has died and his 2 sons have died, so there is no heir. What the story of Ruth is about is Ruth, who is the widow of Elimelech's son, is going to be picked up in levirate marriage by the near kinsman of Elimelech and his son, and the 2 of them are going to come together and they are going to produce an heir for Elimelech. And that's levirate marriage done as it's supposed to be done. We went through last time, as I said, we got through to chapter 2. Again, you'll remember that Ruth and Naomi come back from Moab. They come back at the time of the barley harvest, which is around Passover. Ruth gleans in the fields of Boaz, and she gleans through the barley harvest and through the wheat harvest. That takes, about 4 months, starting at early Nisan, the barley harvest, going on into Shavuot, which is in Sivan, and beyond. So we're talking 3-4 months that she's gleaning various grains in the fields of Boaz. So we pick it up now in chapter 3. Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "Daughter, I must seek a home for you where you may be happy. Now there is your kinsman Boaz, whose girls you are close to. He will be winnowing barley on the threshing floor tonight." What that means is we have come around a full year. We're back to the barley harvest. And this is at the end of the barley harvest, where they've got all the barley in, and they've threshed it, and they are now in the process of winnowing it. For those of you who don't have an agricultural background, when they get grain, they various methods of threshing it, which is separating the kernel from the chaff and all the rest of the stuff that it grows in. Sometimes they'll use flails, sometimes they'll use a ox-drawn sled. I don't know what he's using. But at the end of that process, you've got the kernels of grain separated from the chaff. Typically, a threshing floor is on a ridge. And the idea there is you get a wind flow over the ridge, and you take the grain and you pick it up in baskets, and you flip it up in the air, and the wind going through moves the chaff downwind where it lands in a pile, and the grain just sort of falls straight back down because it's heavier. So you just keep throwing the grain up in the air, and the wind does the separation for you, and you wind up with 2 piles. You wind up with a pile of grain, and you wind up with a pile of chaff, and of course the chaff is then burned, and the grain is taken into the storeroom. That's what's going on as Naomi is telling Ruth what to do. The other thing to keep in mind is, you'll see, Ruth doesn't know what she's doing. She is a Gentile. She's a Moabite. So what she's doing is she's being instructed by Naomi on how to communicate with Boaz. So there's this conversation that's going back and forth between Boaz and Naomi, with Ruth being the one who is conducting the conversation, but Ruth doesn't really know what's going on. So as we go through this, we'll see communication happening back and forth between Boaz and Naomi, that Ruth, she repeats the conversation and she does what she's told, but she really doesn't have any idea what's going on. As I say, she's the subject of the conversation, but the conversation is happening over her head. And I'll point that out as we go along. So now we're all the way down to verse 3. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. But do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. Going back to last week, remember the commandment is to let gleaners go through a field after it has been harvested. We talked a little bit about how if gleaners are not sort of spoken gruffly to, they will soon wind up right up there with the reapers, and they'll be right in among the grain because, people just sort of crowd, if you understand what I'm saying. So apparently it was the deal that you get gleaners in your field, but you sort of kept them run off and back over a long way away from where you were actually working to make sure that they got the leavings as opposed to got the stuff that you were actually harvesting. Boaz, when he takes notice of Ruth, gives instructions that she will be allowed to glean right there with the reapers. In other words, do not harass her, do not run her off, let her be up among you. And in fact, I want you to deliberately leave some extra to make sure she gets plenty. She would not, however, be at the threshing. So she's there while they're reaping and they're binding the shocks and all that kind of stuff. But then she takes what she has gleaned and she goes off somewhere and she beats it out herself and does the threshing with her little bit of grain and goes home. When Boaz's agricultural operation here is now threshing and winnowing a large amount of grain, Ruth is not around. She's not involved in that process at all. What Naomi says is, get your best clothes on, bathe, get yourself anointed, make yourself look as good as is possible for you to look, and then go down to the threshing floor. One other thing before I finish that instruction, the stage that the harvest is in right now, for an agricultural person, this is payday. In other words, you planted the barley sometime back in the fall, you've watched over the fields and defended them from weeds and everything else during the winter. You've now reaped it, you've now threshed it, you've now winnowed it, and you have got a pile of refined grain, and it's now payday. And it would be very normal at the end of that whole process for everybody to tilt up a cold one and have a little bit of a party because you're done. All you got to do now at this point is bag it up and put it in the barn. This is payday. It's a festive occasion. I wouldn't be surprised if there was a little wine or a little beer flowing and everybody's in a really good mood because all that hard work is now done. We now wait for a couple, 3 months until the wheat harvest is ready, and then we start over again. But right now, it's a time to relax and have a good time, and everybody's feeling good. So what Naomi tells Ruth is, okay, they're going to be happy, they're going to be partying, and they're going to sleep on the threshing floor. Now, why might they do that? Protect the grain. In other words, you've gone to all this work, you've got this pile now of threshed grain and have not yet put it into barns. So everybody just sort of beds down there on the threshing floor to make sure that the grain doesn't disappear overnight. Naomi knows all this. This would be common agricultural practice. I'm sure Ruth knows it too. I mean, this isn't any big secret. So at this point, what Naomi says, all right, wait till everybody has eaten, had a couple of drinks, it's dark, the man is feeling good, and he goes off and he lays down to sleep to watch over the grain and pick it back up at 3 again. So bathe, anoint yourself, dress up, and go down to the threshing floor. Do not disclose yourself to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. In other words, until he is had a couple of beers or a glass of wine or whatever they're having, and he's feeling good. Don't come up to him until then. Verse 4. When he lies down, note the place where he lies down, and go over and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what you are to do. She replied, I will do everything you've told me. She has no legitimate place on the threshing floor. In other words, she got dispensation to glean, and she's taken her gleanings and she's taken those home. When she shows up on the threshing floor, there is certainly the possibility that somebody might think that she's trying to get a little more than gleanings. She really has no legitimate place there at this point. So that's why she waits until everybody's had a couple drinks and they've all gone to sleep and they're guarding, and then she sneaks in and lays down at his feet and waits his instructions. By the way, the other part of this is she is going to propose marriage to him. She is not, however, propositioning him. There being a difference between those two terms. She has a claim, or she is asserting a claim which he may pick up. So she has to be there to do that, but it is not the case that, she's gotten herself all tarted up and got her crop top on and, her tramp stamp on her backside, and she's down cruising the harvest. That is not what's going on. So now in verse 6. She went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had instructed her. Boaz ate and drank, and in a cheerful mood went to lie down beside the grain pile. Then she went over stealthily and uncovered his feet and lay down. In the middle of the night, the man gave a start and pulled back. There was a woman lying at its feet. Who are you? He asked. And she replied, I am your handmaid Ruth. Spread your robe over your handmaid, for you are a redeeming kinsman. This is formulaic. She is making a formal request that he redeem Elimelech's plot of land, and in that process, he take her to wife. And remember, when we were talking last time, in the case of Judah and Tamar, you remember Judah's first son marries this lady Tamar, and we don't know who Tamar is or where she's from. She just sort of pops up there in Scripture. For some reason, he dies, the firstborn. So she then is given to Onan, the second son. He refuses to impregnate her, so he dies, God not being pleased with that. Now at this point, Judah's attitude is, this gal's bad luck. What he says is, you go back to your parents' house, wait there until Shelah, my third son, is old enough to get married. But it sort of says in parentheses, as far as I'm concerned, that ain't going to happen. She is stuck. She is waiting for the third son, and in the meantime, she can't do anything. And she is owed a child. So what she does, obviously, is she takes matters into her own hands. She gets herself pregnant by Judah, conceives twins, and you all know the story. But the idea here is a widow has rights. And she is allowed to assert them. So Ruth is the widow of Elimelech's son, which means that Elimelech has died without heirs because his two sons are dead. So she is basically the line from Elimelech down to whoever the firstborn is going to be, and she has a right to go to the kinsman redeemer and say, you need to come to me and get an heir for my dead husband. She's doing everything legally here. Now, this business of spread your robe over me, the first place you want to go is to Ezekiel chapter 16. This is one of my favorite passages of Scripture, and I'm not going to read it all. It's basically God talking to Israel. He's recounting in terms of marriage how he acquired Israel, and later on he will then describe how she becomes a harlot. So it starts off with him finding her newborn, still in the blood of her birth. He cleans her off, he wraps her up, and so forth. Pick it up at verse 7. I let you grow like the plants of the field, and you continued to grow up until you attained womanhood, until your breasts became firm and your hair sprouted. You were still naked and bare when I passed by you again and saw that your time for love had arrived. So I spread my robe over you and covered your nakedness, and I entered into covenant with you by oath, declares the Lord God, thus you became mine. So this idea of spreading his robe over her, and in that process acquiring her as a bride, starts back here in Ezekiel, but it actually goes back to Deuteronomy. Swing now back to Deuteronomy 23 and pick that up in verse 1. No man shall marry his father's former wife, so as to remove his father's garment. That is not saying the same thing as to uncover his father's nakedness. What it's saying is, let's say my father married another woman, other than my mother. My mother died or whatever. My father married somebody else. For some reason that didn't work. She is forbidden to me. As his son, I cannot go to his second wife, because in so doing, I would remove the garment that he has spread over her. I'm reading out of the Tanakh. The verses may be different. But again, when it says, no man shall marry his father's former wife, so as to remove his father's garment, which is to say, his father covered her with his garment, and for his son then to marry that woman would be for the son to uncover the garment that his father had spread over her. So this idea of a man spreading his garment over a woman as a sign of betrothal and marriage goes clear back to the Torah. So when Ruth is at the threshing floor of Boaz, she is laying at his feet and she's pulled his garment over her. What she's saying is, cover me with your garment, which is to say, take me in marriage. I don't know whether she understands this or not, but certainly Naomi does, and certainly Boaz does. All right, now the deal with the kinsman redeemer, and we've said this before, but it's worth saying again. In the Torah, land is never sold. Land is simply leased. Whoever God put on that land back when the nation was divided, at some point will go back to that land. So if you are a member of the tribe of Judah, and you got this little piece of land in the division of the nation under Joshua, that land stays in your family forever. If you become bankrupt or you sell it, you can only sell it up until the Jubilee. At that point, it comes back. So you're not really selling it. What you're doing is you're selling the crops on the land from the time you sell it until the Jubilee. What we can infer here is Elimelech, Ruth's father-in-law, when he left Bethlehem to go to Moab, sold his piece of land. Except he didn't sell his piece of land. He basically sold the crops of that piece of land. Ruth is now coming back and saying, I want that land redeemed. The kinsman redeemer has the right to go to whoever has purchased that land and pay him for the number of crops remaining on that land until Jubilee and take possession of it again. Now there's some restrictions on that, time limits and stuff like that, but basically that's the rule. The deal here is Elimelech had some land around Bethlehem. Ruth is his daughter-in-law, and she is the only fertile female in his line. She's coming now to the kinsman redeemer and saying, I want that land redeemed, and in that process you need to take me as a wife, and you then need to get an heir for my dead husband. All of that is being said here. Now we're all the way down to verse 10. He exclaimed, Be blessed of the Lord, daughter. Your latest deed of loyalty is greater than the first, in that you have not turned to younger men, whether poor or rich. And now, daughter, have no fear. I will do on your behalf whatever you ask, for all the elders of my town know what a fine woman you are. But while it is true I am a redeeming kinsman, there is another redeemer closer than I. Stay for the night, then in the morning, if he will act as a redeemer, good, let him redeem. But if he does not want to act as a redeemer for you, I will do so myself. As the Lord lives, lie down until morning. A couple of things. As we said in the first installment the other day, Boaz appears to be an older man, but he's not dead yet. And he clearly has an eye for a good-looking gal, because as soon as he comes into the field, he sees Ruth and says, who's she? When he realizes that she's family and makes the arrangements he does. But he really isn't expecting that he would marry her, because I get the impression that he's 40, 50, 60, and she is still a fairly young woman. The fact that she turns to him is very flattering to him. What was the kindness that she did before that's mentioned here? Anybody remember? Coming back with Naomi and caring for her. Remember, Naomi's an old woman. She is beyond childbearing age. So Ruth, in coming back with her and giving up the prospect of having a husband in Moab, and perhaps giving up the prospect of ever having a husband, in order to be with and care for her mother-in-law, is the act of kindness that first impressed Boaz. And now he says that this act of kindness, which is turning to me instead of some young buck, is even kinder still. And of course, we have the small problem that there's somebody closer to you than I am who has a stronger right than I have. So I need to go find out if he's willing to be the Redeemer. And if he is, then there's nothing I can do. But if he's not, then I will do it. Verse 14. So she lay down at his feet until dawn. She rose before one person could distinguish another, for he thought, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. In other words, what happened here has the potential of being misunderstood. Rather than having to explain to everybody what happened, we'll just get you on out of here before anybody sees you here. Verse 15. And he said, hold out the shawl you are wearing. She held it out while he measured out 6 measures of barley, and he put it on her back. When she got back to town, she came to her mother-in-law, who asked, how is it with you, daughter? He told her all that the man had done for her, and she added, he gave me these 6 measures of barley, saying to me, do not go back to your mother-in-law empty-handed. And Naomi said, stay here, daughter, till you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. So this is communication now coming back from Boaz to Naomi. Ruth just thinks, wow, being real generous here. He's giving me 6 measures of threshed grain. Naomi says 6. That means that the matter is incomplete. 7 is complete. So what Boaz is saying to Naomi is, I got it. I will go sort this out. I will not rest until it's done, and I will get it done today, because this matter is not complete. And that's what the 6 measures means, incomplete. Why didn't Ruth just wander over to Boaz's house, knock on the door, and say, I need a kinsman redeemer, will you do it? Why all this business with sneaking around at night and all that kind of stuff? He may very well have staff assistants that take care of, random marriage proposals, and she just can't get to him during a normal day. In other words, he's got folks that, he's a busy man, and he's got folks that screen people out, and she can't get there. That's certainly a possibility. I will suggest the other possibility is this is really a good time to ask for it. He's just had a harvest, he's just had a good meal, he's just had a few drinks, and he's lying down and very relaxed and off his guard, and bam, this good-looking young gal shows up at his feet and says, you're my near kinsman, marry me. One of the things that might be going on there is it's sort of This is the best chance. At this point in the story, he has got a 1-year track record of observing her, that she's a responsible lady and she does what she needs to do, and you know, she's not some flighty little piece of fluff, which he certainly might have thought had she done this during the first barley harvest, because he doesn't know her at that point. So that's, I agree. The other part of this is, by doing it in a clandestine manner at night, if he's not interested, then he can refuse and nobody knows that the offer's been made and nobody's embarrassed. So I think there's probably some merit in that too. The other thing is, if you'll remember, in the case of Lot and his daughters, and in the case of Judah and Tamar, in both cases the woman initiated the encounter. So she is following in that tradition, and in both cases the woman, or the women, there's 3 of them, set it up so they had the maximum chance of success. I think Ruth is doing exactly the same thing. She's setting it up so she's got the maximum shot at success here. In a sense, she has Boaz in very much the same position that Tamar had Judah and Lot's daughters had Lot. The difference here is she is not pressing it to the sexual conclusion that those other 2 ladies did, again demonstrating character. We'll pick it up at chapter 4 next time. Would somebody like to close in prayer?